Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today I want to dive into an essay that was published on Substack, and it kind of covers two themes. One, social media and how it relates to our time and our quality of life, but also, in my interpretation, how we're transitioning into a new economy that's predicated on attention rather than consumption. And so I think it's really important to start paying attention, if you haven't been paying attention already, to the relationship you have with social media, technology, consumption of content, so things like this, and the role that plays in your lives. Because I think most of us have been on autopilot for much of the last decade and a half now. We all adopted social media, accepted all these new technologies, put mobile computer devices into our pockets, just accepted all this new stuff. And I don't think we critically stopped to think what the consequences of all of this was. And now, of course, we're starting to see those consequences manifest. A good example would be Jonathan Haidt's work. He wrote The Anxious Generation, but he talks about in his research how, you have spikes in adolescent mental health issues right around the time that the App Store took off and mobile first social media apps, so not just Facebook, but mobile first ones like Snapchat and Instagram really started taking off. And of course, we're seeing divisiveness in politics today. A lot of that is being driven by content and social media. So I think it's really important to pay attention to this now, because as we continue going down the trajectory we're on with more AI integration and more attention-based consumption within the economy, I think it's going to be harder and harder to extract ourselves from this. So let's dive in. This piece is called How Social Media Shortens Your Life, and the author is Gurwinder, and he writes The Prism on Substack. So if you don't follow his work, definitely follow it. He has some really interesting stuff. So the first section is titled The Normalization of Amnesia, and he starts it off by talking about how we fuss about tech giants stealing our data, but we've been strangely nonchalant as those same companies carry out the greatest heist in our time in history. And so that heist is, of course, the actual theft of time. And so he says social media platforms have been stealing our time using a sneaky trick. They've been speeding up our sense of time, effectively shortening our lives, so we think we had less than we did and don't notice some of it as it was pilfered. And this is something, I've experienced, and he talks about here. He says you may log on to quickly check your notifications, and before you know it, half an hour has gone by, and you're still on the platform, unable to account for where the time went. And he references an experiment here, but people using apps like TikTok and Instagram start to underestimate the time they're on such platforms after just a few minutes of use, even when they're explicitly told to keep track of time. This is something I struggle with, especially because a lot of the work I do requires publication and distribution on social media. So I don't use TikTok. I don't use Instagram. I really try to avoid all scrolling based apps on my phone. Like I don't have Facebook on my phone. I don't have X on my phone. I don't have LinkedIn on my phone. So I try to avoid, that's the boundary I've set, is I don't use these apps on my phone, but I'm still using them on my computer. And so I've found, for me, and this is, something I struggle with, and probably other folks who create various forms of content can relate. I'm constantly looking at metrics, and it's not healthy, I know, but it's, looking for validation that what I'm doing is right, or I'm on the right path. I'm constantly convinced that I'm wasting time or being frivolous with time, and I'm not adding any real value. So I constantly look at metrics for that. And so I find there's been times where an hour could go by and I'm just oscillating between different, Substack and then YouTube and then LinkedIn and then X and then back again, and just looking for confirmation and validation that what I'm doing is valuable. But I've definitely experienced this where in my head, I'm like, I should set a timer or something to make sure I don't stay on for too long, and then I end up staying on for way too long. And then I keep track of my time. I think I've mentioned this in other videos before, but I use a tool called Clockify. So I'm literally clocked in right now to this, recording this, and it's kind of obsessive, but I like doing it because it helps me evaluate the value of my time and how I'm using it and where I'm wasting it. And so there's days where I could put in a full like 8-hour workday, but only have maybe 4.5 or 5 hours worth of time actually clocked in, because the rest of it has been kind of taken in 15 and 20-minute increments, scrolling through my LinkedIn feed and looking at stuff and not even realizing it's gone. And I've even, I also use Opal on my phone, which is an app where you can track and lock yourself out of certain distracting apps. And then also, like, iPhones come with screen time, so you can see how much you've picked up your phone and logged in, all that kind of stuff. And even I've looked at that from time to time, and even then it shocks me because I'm average. I think I'm pretty much average with most people, and I'm not even using like most of the apps everyone else is using. I'm not using TikTok, right? Don't watch YouTube videos on my phone. I try to be very intentional, but even with the best intentions, it's really hard to stay ahead of this self. So stay ahead of yourself. So I think this is absolutely true, where you don't realize you're using social media or you're spending as much time on it as you are, and it warps your sense of time. And so he talks about here how, we seldom think of time in the moment. The majority of our sense of time is retrospective. The more we remember a certain period of time, the longer that period feels, and the slower time seems to have passed. So he goes on later in the essay and talks about this, but this is really in relation to memories and our ability to create memories that are kind of like tent poles in the timeline of our lives. And so we can look back, like I can look back and think of things in a linear timeline, think of certain key milestones and events, and that helps me understand like where I am now in relationship to the past. But with social media, you don't get those tent poles. You don't have anything to anchor you. And so it just flows. It's just almost like a river. It just flows, and you don't really know how much has gone past you at any given point in time. And so that's why it's really easy to waste time on social media. And so he says here, a sinister thing about social media is that it speeds up your time both in the moment and in retrospect. It does this by simultaneously impairing your awareness of the present and your memory of the past. And so one of the ways it does this is social media has been designed to be as ostentatious and shocking as possible. And so, you're no longer just like scrolling through social media and seeing things of interest. You're seeing things that shock you, that astound you, that, maybe cause alarm, maybe cause anger, maybe evoke some sort of emotion. And over time, that desensitizes you. So it becomes normalized. And that's probably why, he talks in the beginning, the normalization of amnesia. Like, the things you see become so routine. And he says here, routine being passive and therefore immemorable, speed times up. So the things you're seeing are so routine, so normalized, so insignificant from a memory standpoint that it just speeds everything up. So time flows by quicker because you're not creating memories, and the things you're passively consuming on social media, it's just become absolutely normal to you. And I love how he concludes this section with a highlight from Facebook and Facebook's founding. He talks about Sean Parker. He said, the thought process that went into building these applications was all about how do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible. Parker and other tech executives employ attention engineers to design interfaces and algorithms that warp your sense of time. So all this was deliberate. It's not like there's this grand conspiracy of, people in Silicon Valley who want to do you harm, but at the same time, they've created these new business models, this attention-based business model that extracts your attention, extracts data and how you use these platforms, and sells it on the back end to advertisers. And then those advertisers are in the business of selling you products, yes, but also stories and ideas and myths. And I've shared this example before, but when I was on Instagram, I was really deep into the weeds of the zero waste movement. I learned about all of that on social media. Like if Instagram hadn't been a part of my life, I would never, there would have been no real way for me to have, engaged with that kind of idea. So it really took off on social media. It was really prolific on Instagram, conveniently, where a lot of women spend time and conveniently the platform of choice for a lot of millennial women. And through my experience with zero waste, I realized it had absolutely nothing to do with the kind of philosophical, do good for the earth, green, earth friendly kind of ethos. It was more about convincing me that I was a problem, my consumer habits were a problem, and the only way to solve this problem was to consume more, but to consume different products and better products, more eco-friendly products. And this is why you've seen a lot of small businesses and brands start up over the last maybe decade or so, with regard to earth-friendly or good for the planet and that kind of stuff. It's not, none of it's actually good for the planet. If you really want to be good for the planet, you wouldn't buy anything at all, right? Like you would reuse and repurpose everything you already own. You wouldn't need to go buy some cheap product that's made in China and marketed to you as a eco-friendly product. But the thing with these platforms is they're designed to create stories like that and myths like that in order to get people like me captivated by them so that they can sell all of that to advertisers and people who benefit from selling products. And, one of the critiques with zero waste, and that's why I wanted to bring it up, is you've seen progressive greenwashing over time where, people are selling you products at a higher price point. For example, a lot of like Unilever and brands that make like deodorant, for example, they've started packaging more eco-friendly deodorants in not reusable, but like cardboard packaging, like biodegradable packaging, things like that. Things that seem innocuous, but they've really those ideas emanate from somewhere. And I think social media is really the place where ideas are being engineered and transmitted across the population and then picked up by suppliers. So folks, creating products and services and then connecting, the buyers in the market who have been primed with this information to the people selling it. So I don't know. Maybe it is a giant conspiracy, but I do believe that, this is absolutely true, is the people who created these apps did so with the intention of taking as much of your time and attention as possible. And I think they've succeeded. So the second part of this is called The Greatest Heist of All Time. This goes into talking about how social media was actually built off of the same theories that were developed around casinos. You've probably heard this before, but a lot of the features on social media apps, especially the notifications, the color scheme, so red alert buttons, it's all designed based off like casino games, like slot machines and that kind of thing. But one of the things he talks about in the essay is the Gruen effect. And so this is laying things out. So this is in the case of casinos, but you can also apply this to a grocery store or any sort of store for that matter. But it's this intentional layout of spaces so that the moment when a shopper loses track of what they enter the store for and begins aimlessly wandering and impulse buying. So it's to get you lost, it's to get you confused, and so that you just start looking around. You become overwhelmed. The environment becomes overwhelming. You're distracted. And so rather than remaining instinctual and intentional, you become compliant and you're less resistant. So you're more, you're more primed to buy things, subconsciously accept consumer marketing and advertising. You're not going to push back. Stores are intentionally designed this way. And so social media apps have been as well. He also talks about the creation of FOMO. So deliberately engineering these apps so you feel like you truly are missing out, even if whatever you think you're missing out on isn't even real to begin with. So talks about how it was designed for casinos but was applied to social media. And so he concludes this section by saying the Gruen effect is now commonly elicited online similarly to the real world by continually placing distractions in people's way. Every web page is littered with links, each a path to another maze, and many of these links are deliberately placed where they don't belong. Search results are sneakily scattered with recommendations unrelated to your search, and personal notifications often have generic news links hiding among them. The goal is to alienate you from your own intentions so you lose track of where you were and when you were. And that's really, I think that's really interesting to think about because I can definitely see this from losing track of what you were intending to do. I have written previously in the personal finance space and kind of learned by studying what other people were doing, how they designed and architected their websites. And one of the things you might not know if you're not, in that world is a lot of folks who have like online courses or online products to sell, they will create specific web pages that don't have navigation bars, or that they're laid out, they're really long. And you've probably seen these. They're really long. They have like testimonials. They talk about all the benefits of what you can expect from the course, everything you'll learn. And it's super long. And the idea is to keep you scrolling for as long as possible and create that sense of missing out so that you ultimately buy. So even sales pages are deliberately designed in such a way to get you to buy things. So everything you encounter is designed like that. But I hadn't ever thought of it from the perspective of time. So the fact that you lose a sense of time is an interesting thing to think about. And again, with social media, you're just constantly scrolling all the time. So you don't know where you are or where you're going, but you also don't know when you are either. And we don't really think about time like that. I think we all take for granted that there's 24 hours in a day, right? But the passage of time itself, can speed up or slow down depending on what you're doing. So the third section in the essay is called The Labyrinth of Shattered Hours. And he goes in the section and talks about social media and time, and with this idea of like a maze in mind. So instead of going to a destination or a point, you kind of enter this maze in social media. So he says the opposite of a maze is a route, and a route through time is a story. This is because stories are linear and syntagmatic. I hope I said that right. Each moment of the tale semantically follows from the previous, and this collective meaningfulness anchors the whole thing in memory. The memorable and sequential nature of stories makes them good timekeepers. As such, the way we make sense of time is through emplotment, by turning time into stories. Your social media feed resists emplotment because it's the opposite of a story. It's a chronological maze. It has no beginning, middle, or end, and each post is unrelated to the next. Thus, not only do you forget time while scrolling through posts, but you also forget the posts themselves. We have no problem recounting the plot of a good book we read or movie we saw last year, yet we can barely remember what we saw on social media yesterday. This is absolutely true if you think about it. If you've read a book recently or watched a movie, there's a clear like outline you follow. There's movies usually follow like the hero's journey, and there's usually a problem, and there's a guide, and you get to a climax, and then, there's a resolution. It's usually, unless you're making Avatar, it's usually less than 2 hours. But there's a clear beginning, middle, end. You know who the characters are. You kind of have a sense of where you're going. Even like music, for better or for worse, has pattern recognition in it. So you kind of know what you're getting, you know what to expect. With social media, like he says here in this post, like there's no beginning, middle, or end. You're just incessantly scrolling. And a lot of times too, especially if you're using it, something like TikTok, things are unrelated, right? You could have one, video of someone ranting in their car about, whatever issue du jour. The next one could be someone doing a stunt. The next one could be someone cooking. So it's almost like flipping through channels. If you think of it, TV, like flipping through channels, trying to figure out what to watch, and you have no idea like what you're actually looking for, what you're doing. It's just kind of going on, and all the while, you're feeling emotions, you're getting dopamine rushes, you're experiencing things internally in your internal world. You're ingesting all this information that you're consuming through social media, but you don't really know what you're doing. And so he says here, by speeding up time on social media, attention engineers don't just make you waste more time, they might also reduce your likelihood of regretting it. He talks about how the push notifications of social media periodically tease you with what you're missing out on, and the only way for you to find out more is to re-enter the maze. And that's, if you think about it, a lot of these platforms, that's the game where they're playing, right? If they're built off of advertising and they're built off of attention and harvesting your attention, the goal is to keep you on their platform for as long as possible. And this is why, if you're in the content creation world, a lot of platforms if you include a link, an outbound link to another platform, it's not going to prioritize it in the search results. So LinkedIn is a great example of this. I have a love-hate relationship with LinkedIn. But if I post anything, any of my essays, any YouTube videos on LinkedIn, it goes nowhere in the algorithm. And it's because the goal of LinkedIn is to keep people on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn wants you to repost whatever your content is and keep it on LinkedIn because that's how they make money. Same with X, same with Substack, same with YouTube. The goal is to keep you on the platform. But the thing I don't think a lot of us consider is that social media platforms aren't just competing with social media platforms for attention. They're competing with other types of platforms as well. So YouTube is competing with Netflix. So Netflix competes with Disney Plus, competes with Hulu and all the other streaming services, but it's also competing with social media. It's competing with YouTube, it's competing with TikTok, it's competing with Instagram, all of those platforms. And these platforms compete with other things like physical books. If you spend time reading a physical book, you're probably not spending time, watching a video on YouTube. So this is something that they take into account when they design these platforms. They really want you to stay on the platform or as long as possible. So they create this, it's not like a literal maze, but they just have created an experience where you're just kind of meandering around, don't really know what you're looking for, don't know how much time you're spending. You're not going to regret it, right? Because you're continuously getting all these positive dopamine hits. And you feel like you're having a good experience using the platform, even though, like, I think most of us would agree, social media probably hasn't been a net benefit to our lives. So he talks about how continually dividing your attention between two worlds means you can never fully settle in either, creating constant anxiety and stress. By constantly interrupting you, social media platforms can impair your awareness and shorten your days, even while you're not on them. So that you end up scrolling through the real world as shallowly as a virtual one. And this is why I really like this essay, because he brings it back to reality. It's not just a critique of social media. It's how our attention has been hijacked, and it's been deliberately engineered to spend all this time scrolling on these social media apps. But in doing so, it's rewired our brain so that when we're in the real world, we can't turn that off. We're approaching the real world through through like this kind of scrolling idea and this passiveness. And so when you're not in one or the other, when you're kind of just moseying about through life, it creates a state of anxiety. So I would be interested if you've read any research or have seen anything about this that connects these ideas. I would love to see that, because I know there's been research about how social media has created more anxiety, more stress, more depression, especially like I was saying before, with adolescents. But I don't know if there's been research that says why. And maybe, for some people, the why is, you feel inferior, or it creates like this idealistic world that doesn't really exist. I think there's that part of it. But I think this idea of not being fully grounded or settled in one world or the other, we're coexisting in a physical and a digital world, and we don't really know where our place is. I think that's a really interesting thesis, and I would love to dive deeper into that. So if you have any recommendations of stuff you've read on that, I would love to hear more about it. He also talks here, which is interesting. So screen time speeds up puberty, and it also seems to speed up aging, which I don't know if this is related to what's going on with Gen Z, but that might actually be true. There's been a lot of videos and some tropes about this, but Gen Z looks incredibly old. I have seen pictures, I'm sure you have too, of 23, 24, 25-year-olds who look like they're 40. And some of it is, I think, a lot of younger Gen Zers and even Gen Alpha. They're obsessed with skincare and Botox and all these procedures that really shouldn't be done until you're, my age or older. But they're really obsessed with this stuff. And I would be interested too, as well, to know how much veracity there is in this, if screen time really does speed up aging, because Gen Z looks so much older than they biologically are. And so he goes on to say, ultimately, social media doesn't just threaten the quantity of your time, but also the quality. And it doesn't just accelerate your experience life, but potentially also your actual biological life. And that's fascinating to think about. What impact has this actually had on us? Like, if this is true, that it does, speed up your biological life, like, you can't reverse that. Obviously you can't get time back, but you can't reverse the biological consequences of using social media either. So that's really interesting to think about. So the next section is called Taking Time Back. So he says the simplest way to escape the tech giants' control is to stop using their platforms. I agree. I got off Instagram a couple years ago, haven't looked back, and I think my life is better for it. And I think one of the reasons why the woman's sphere is so problematic right now is because everyone is circulating. They're getting their information off of either Instagram or TikTok. I think those are kind of the two preferred media platforms for women. And that's where they're getting all their information from. And so it's really this giant echo chamber. And again, like I was saying before, especially with my own experiences, like these platforms have been deliberately designed and engineered to manipulate us and create stories and myths and narratives that we literally buy into, so that we're convinced to buy products, vote for things, take action in our physical lives based on the information we receive from these platforms. So he references a study and says it found that the time people saved by quitting social media was often just spent browsing other apps, which are increasingly emulating the time warping features of social media. So again, I think streaming services are a good comparison here. I can remember a time when you had to wait for a new show to be released. So if you were involved with Game of Thrones, like I was, that was a whole decade of my life I will never get back. But you had to wait every week. I think it was on Sundays, HBO released a new episode, and you had to wait. You couldn't just binge watch everything all at once. I think Hulu does this now too, where you have to wait for things to be released. But for the most part, especially Netflix, you don't have to wait. You can just binge through the whole thing, and it's really encouraged to do so. So yeah, even if you quit social media, it looks like people are just substituting it with other media and digital based platforms that are equally as attention grabbing and time consuming as social media. But the thing he brings up here, which again, like I hadn't considered, so that's why I really appreciate this post he wrote and wanted to call attention to, is he talks about chatbots, and especially like AI powered chatbots. So they're becoming curvilinear, increasingly ending their answers with a question or an offer for further help to create a kind of conversational infinite scroll. So if you are not in the loop with where AI is going and how these chatbots are evolving, they are slowly moving towards embedding advertising into their platforms. And this makes sense for Google and Meta, because both of those businesses and their entire business models are predicated on advertising. If you think Google is just this benevolent search engine that gives you free information, you're completely out of it. They are the largest, one of the largest advertisers on the planet. The whole Google architecture is based around harvesting your data so they can sell it to advertisers. Same with Facebook, right? Facebook is not about connecting people. They don't want to make it easier for you to talk to your grandma. Like, yeah, maybe that's a benefit, but that wasn't the purpose of it. It's to use social connection to sell advertising. So as AI gets rolled out, it has changed the business model. You're seeing this with Google, and that's why I reference it. But they've had their first ever drop in search. So for 2 decades at this point, they have had over 90% market share of global search. For the first time ever, that has decreased. It's below the 90% mark. You've seen the release of AI overviews and AI mode on Google. And so for freelance writers like me, that has been a death knell to our careers. Like the type of content I was paid to create 2 years ago is now completely unviable, because people can just query a search in Google and get the answers without having to click through a piece of content or click a link to read an article. So that's gone too. So we're seeing transformation in real time, but the business models for these AI platforms haven't been fully established yet. And I think if you see how advertising continues to creep in even to subscription-based products, so Netflix, great example, used to be just exclusively, well, it used to be you get DVDs, then it was just subscription, then they had tiered subscriptions, and now the lowest tier subscription has an advertisement piece to it. Kindle, Amazon Prime, Hulu, all of these platforms have advertising embedded to them. So that is the cornerstone of the Silicon Valley economy, or at least the Web 2 economy that we're kind of leaving. It was advertising. And so I think to maintain profitability and viability until we emerge into this new attention-based economy that comes forward out of AI, you're going to have to keep some sort of the advertising based platforms. And so you're starting to see this where ChatGPT recommends things, Perplexity recommends things, obviously Google is recommending things, and eventually if they're not doing it yet, they will. They'll start selling that to advertisers. So next time you ask ChatGPT for something, it will recommend a product to you or a solution or a service. And so the idea here is to create an infinite scroll, because again, that's where the advertising dollars are. So these platforms that we're being told to use to help us, and yeah, I mean, I use AI tools, and I think it's important we're all literate and understand how to use them. But that also includes understanding the business models underpinning these models or these platforms and these tools, understanding what the purpose is, and understanding how they exist. Nothing exists for free. There's always an exchange somewhere. So if you're giving your attention and your data, ask why, and then dig deeper to understand how your attention is being converted into profit for someone else. Okay, so he talks about curvilinear mazes speed up time because little within them sticks out to attention or into memory. So you don't have any like turns or angles or surprises. You're just kind of in this flowing loop and just going around in circles, and you can't escape it. You're just in this thing. Slowing time begins with refusing these ersatz experiences. I had to look that word up. It's a fun word. I didn't know what it meant, but it's made or used as a substitute, typically an inferior one for something else. So basically, these inferior experiences for only the real thing is weighty enough to anchor itself in memory. So he says, read books instead of scrolling social media feeds, go on adventures instead of staying at home. I think that is important. It's something I struggle with too. Everything costs money, so it's hard to go out and do things. But I think it's really important to, pepper your time, pepper your week, pepper your weekends with new and novel experiences, doing things different. Like, even if you take one day out of a month, a weekday, and play hooky and just go do something fun. That's 12 times a year. That gives you something to look forward to, something different, something novel, something unique, something to kind of jolt you out of, the passiveness that you might otherwise find yourself in. Okay, so the simplest way to strengthen a feeling is to savor experiences. So stop idly scrolling through life as if it's a feed and learn to focus your attention on the here and now. I think that's really important. Again, it's really hard to do. Continually question why you're doing things and stop when you don't have a good answer. The more you avoid living on autopilot, the more of life you'll remember. And that's really interesting to think about, because he goes on and talks about it later on in life. And he says it's why time seems to speed up as we age. As we grow older, fewer of our experiences are new, so fewer stick in memory. It's also why old people tend to remember their early lives better than their adult lives. And I don't know if there's a correlation here. Again, I'd be interested in learning more about this, but alongside the increase in social media and just like living a more digital lives, we've seen a rise in things like dementia and Alzheimer's. I think there's a dietary component to it and, just a lifestyle component. And I wonder how much of that has to do with the fact that we're not creating memories, that we're not actively living lives, that everything's on autopilot. So when you get to a point later on in life where, Alzheimer's and dementia sets in, it's harder to remember who you were because you don't have these anchor points, or as many anchor points in your life as maybe you need. I don't know if it's related. I don't know if there's any connection. That could be just me making that up. But I'd be curious to know if there's anything to do with that. If you've experienced someone with dementia or Alzheimer's, I'd be curious to know how that experience was like, and if memories and the ability to create memories, like the relationship between that and maybe staving off some of the side effects of, cognitive decline as you get older. He says here, even small breaks in routine can form richer memories and slow time. Again, kind of like I was saying, just like play hooky and just surprise yourself and see what happens. To make life feel longer, choose experiences that are novel over familiar, intentional over habitual, narrative over disjointed, emotional over neutral. It says the problem then is not just that time passes us by, we pass time by because we'd rather do other things than worry about it. So it's so easy to get, kind of in a routine, and I'm guilty of this too. And then when you add on the social media piece and you're just like passively scrolling, like you just lose track of where you are, when you are in existence, and things just speed up really quickly. And yeah, I mean, I've felt this. It's like I'm aware of this. I've spent a lot of time studying this. I've read a lot of Cal Newport's work. If you're not familiar with him, he is a computer science professor out of Georgetown University. But he's written a lot of books about email and deep work, and he wrote one about digital minimalism and how to create boundaries around technologies. But he's someone who thinks deeply about this stuff as well. And so, I've I'm aware of this. It's something I think about. But even I struggle to implement the boundaries that I know are super important. So he ends it by talking about remembering to remember. So he talks about how the ancients had long known that reminding yourself that you'll die doesn't typically increase anxiety for the future, but it does increase appreciation for the present. And so he goes into memento mori. So if you follow Stoic philosophy, you've probably heard that. But it's just like a reminder that, your time is finite and eventually it's going to come to an end. And when you live on social media, like you won't have that appreciation for the here and now, because you're not even just constantly living in a state of flow. You're constantly living in a world that doesn't exist, right? Social media is made up. It's all these stories and myths and narratives, like I was saying. But it's an illusion of what you think should be, and what your life should look like, not what it actually is, and not what it is for the majority of people, right? The majority of people are not, going out to these wild travel excursions like you see on social media. They're not living in these massive giant houses like you see on social media. They're just normal people. And the more you can route yourself and ground yourself in that, I think the better off you'll be. But he talks about how his digital equivalent of memento mori was following people on YouTube who had terminal cancer diagnoses and just like seeing their videos. And we were scrolling through YouTube and we found a guy came up in the feed and literally this, and it hit me. But someone, I think he was probably early 30s, so probably around my age. And he found out he had a terminal cancer diagnosis, and he was, I think, living in Arkansas. And he just was recording a video in his car. And he's like, yep, found out I have cancer. I'm going to sell everything and move to Thailand and go, travel and see what happens. And, you don't think about those things because they're so far away, or they happen to other people, right? They don't happen to us. They don't happen to you. They happen to other people. So in this essay, he talks about how he would track and follow some of these folks on social media, on YouTube specifically, who had these terminal diagnoses, and how they were approaching the end of their lives. And he says they're all dead now, but their ghosts live forever online, eternally, terminally ill. And from my forced interest in them, they constantly haunt my video recommendations, so that whenever I visit YouTube to procrastinate, they suddenly materialize to warn me, make the most of every moment, for the universe doesn't owe you a tomorrow. And that's something that really caught my attention reading this. Everything we post online lives forever. And I don't think we realize that. So the things we're worried about today, the things we're concerned about today, that's what we'll be known for, if, heaven forbid something happens. And so that's why, it is really important to not just think about where you are today, but think about where you're going. Think about the legacy you want to leave. I like to highlight videos of, folks on TikTok saying crazy things about complaining about their relationships, wives complaining about their husbands, young women complaining about student loan crisis. I've done videos of a girl who it was like a day in a life of working with her at Microsoft, and she hardly worked at all. But this is the legacy people are creating for themselves, and they're so focused on the social media aspect of existence and the superficial, likes and follows and all that kind of stuff. They don't realize that's becoming their legacy. So this is a really good reminder, what do you want your legacy to be? Well, what do you want people to remember you by? Something you might post on social media is cool today. But in 15 years from now, is it going to be cool? And this is especially true with, platforms like OF. If you're 18, 19, 20 years old. You're posting pictures on there today. 20 years from now, what's a 20-year older version of you going to think about this? What's your family going to think about it? Your future family, you know? Things to think about, like putting your life in a different perspective. And that changes how you think about time, right? If you're not constantly hustling for the likes and the follows on social media, like you can have a very different perspective on, you know, on your life and what your kind of what your purpose is. So he says the key to maintaining a memorable life is to fill your feeds and life with these right angle turns. So again, getting out of this like circular loop that a lot of us find ourselves in, this circular maze, and just putting twists and turns and introducing things into your life that are important. Okay, he says to be alive is to possess an unfathomably rare gift. Treat your time in this world with gratitude it deserves. Don't waste it scrolling through posts you won't even remember tomorrow. It's just, yeah, that's a good cherry on top to finish it. I think we're all caught in this, and you know, I humbly admit, like, I am no different, and it's really hard to get out of this loop. So this is a fantastic essay. I've honestly, you know, obviously just covered some highlights that I found interesting, but I would highly recommend reading the whole thing for yourself. I think it's a really good reminder, you know, kind of what the purpose, what our lives are like, what the purpose is, what we're actually doing, and where we're going. I think the social media feeds we're used to today, it's not going to be what we're going to experience tomorrow. I think with the introduction of AI, the increased integration of our lives on computer-based platforms, the integration of our physiology and biology with the internet and AI and all that kind of stuff. I think this is leading us down to a potentially dark rabbit hole, dark place. You know, very much a Ready Player One kind of world where we're just plugged in all the time. You know, we're living in an economy that's based on exchanging attention rather than living in the real world. So this is, I think, a really good read. And if you're on social media, maybe it'll challenge you to rethink how much time you spend on it. So appreciate you for watching. If you enjoyed this video and found some value in it, I would love it if you would like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.